Welcome to Scary Phantom, where the eerie meets the soothing. Every night, I bring you thrilling horror stories that not only send chills down your spine but also help you unwind for a peaceful sleep. Relax, listen, and let the stories take you away to a world where the dark is both exciting and calming. The encounter: I was inspecting the main engine room when suddenly, the metal doors began to close on their own. The temperature started dropping rapidly, and I noticed water footprints forming in front of me, but there was no one visible. My heart began to race. What was happening? I was the chief engineer on the research vessel Atlantic Explorer. Our ship was in the depths of the ocean, searching for new energy sources. The water footprints were now moving toward me, 1, 2, 3 steps, as if someone was walking barefoot. With each step, the room grew colder. My breath was now visible in the air, like fog. The temperature in the engine room was dropping to impossible levels, -10 degrees Celsius, yet the thermometer confirmed it. "Is anyone there?" I asked in a trembling voice, already knowing I might not want to hear the answer. There was no response, but the water footprints stopped just 2 steps away from me. I grabbed my walkie-talkie and tried to call Captain Jackson on the bridge. "Captain, something strange is happening in the engine room. The doors closed on their own, and the temperature, bzzz, Ethan, bzzzt. Can't hear, bzzzt. Help, bzzzt." The communication system had failed. I was alone in the sealed engine room, with invisible water footprints surrounding me. Suddenly, the massive turbine, which always ran at a constant speed, began to slow down. Then it stopped completely. Silence. The heart of the research vessel had stopped beating. Emergency lights flickered on, bathing the room in a deep red glow. The water footprints began to form again, this time circling around me, as if something was observing me. I steadied myself and moved toward the emergency toolbox, hoping to find something to pry the door open. As I reached for the box, I felt my feet getting wet. Looking down, I was shocked. The floor was now covered in water, but it wasn't normal water. It was thick, almost black, and instead of reflecting light, it seemed to absorb it, with shadows moving beneath the surface. The water was now ankle-deep, making it difficult to move, as if it was pulling me down. I managed to grab a heavy wrench from the toolbox and, with a determination that defied logic, started moving toward the nearest emergency exit. "You won't escape," a voice said, deep gurgling, as if speaking from underwater. I froze. "Who are you? What do you want?" The water grew deeper, now reaching my knees. The shadows within it became clearer, human shapes, hands, feet, faces, floating in the water as if being pulled down. "We are hungry," the voice replied, closer now. "And you will join us." A hand emerged from the water, covered in mud, reeds, and sea sludge, but unmistakably human, and grabbed my leg. I screamed and struck the hand with the wrench. It disappeared back into the water, but the water level continued to rise, now reaching my waist. Breathing heavily, I reached the emergency door and activated the override switch. But as the door opened, I saw that the corridor was also flooded, with even more shadows moving in the water. I had only one option left: the emergency escape pod. It was located down the left corridor. If I could reach it, I might be able to send a distress signal. I waded through the water, each step a struggle as the invisible hand seemed to pull at my clothes, dragging me down. The water was now up to my chest, and I had to hold my breath as it reached my mouth. Suddenly, I heard a scream. Lisa Thompson, our marine biologist. Her voice came from the end of the corridor, filled with pain and terror. Should I stop and help her, or try to save myself? The escape pod was only 20 feet away. I was almost there. But Lisa's screams echoed in my ears. I said a final prayer, and as the water rose, I moved toward Lisa's voice. #### part 2. Into the depths, Lisa's screams grew louder, but they began to change. They no longer sounded human. There was a gurgling quality to them, as if she was screaming underwater. I hesitated, unsure. "Lisa," I called out, the water now up to my neck. The screams stopped. Only silence and the faint rippling of water remained. Then, something emerged from the water in front of me. First a head, then shoulders, and finally a full body. It was Lisa, but not the Lisa I knew. Her eyes were completely black, her skin covered in green-gray algae, and her hair floated like underwater plants. Water dripped from her mouth, and when she opened it, I saw her teeth, no longer human, but razor-sharp and triangular, like a shark's. "Ethan," she said, her voice a strange harmony. Partly Lisa, but partly something else, something from the depths. "Join us. The water calls for all of us." I stepped back, horrified. "Lisa, what happened to you? What is this?" "We discovered it, Ethan," Lisa said, moving closer through the water. "In the deep trench, where we started drilling. It's not just water. It's alive. And now we are part of it." "We? You mean the rest of the crew?" Lisa laughed, a watery sound filled with bubbles. "Almost everyone. Only you and the captain are left. And the captain's time is almost up." "You're not Lisa," I said firmly, trying to convince myself. "What are you?" "We are everything, Ethan," she replied. "We are the firstborn of the oceans, free from limitations. Perfect. And we will make you perfect too." I noticed that Lisa's hands now had webbing between her fingers, membranes like those of aquatic creatures. Her body was changing too, her shoulders stretching at unnatural angles. I watched in horror as Lisa opened her mouth wider. Her jaw unhinged like a snake's, and her mouth expanded, large enough to swallow me whole. "Run!" A voice shouted from behind me. Captain Jackson stood in the corridor, holding a waterproof flashlight. "Ethan, run now." Lisa, or whatever she had become, screeched, a sound no human could make, and lunged at the captain. I paddled with all my strength through the water, heading for the escape pod. Behind me, I heard the sounds of struggle and splashing. I didn't dare look back. As I reached the escape pod door, I heard the captain scream, "Ethan, Emergency Protocol Delta 3. The ocean is..." His voice cut off with a final gurgle. Tears filled my eyes, a mix of fear, stress, and loss. I activated the pod's controls, and the door began to close. But just before it sealed, a wet hand reached through, Captain Jackson's, but his skin now had the same green-gray tint, and webbing was forming between his fingers. "Please, Ethan," he said, his voice still holding a trace of humanity. "Let me in. I'm in control. His eyes began to change, his pupils expanding, his irises dissolving until his eyes were completely black. "I'm sorry, Captain," I said and pressed the manual override button. The door severed the captain's hand, which fell to the floor of the pod. As the door sealed, the severed hand dissolved into a puddle of water. The pod's auto-sequence activated, ejecting me from the ship. I watched as the Atlantic Explorer slowly drifted away, its lights still glowing like underwater beacons. Then I saw it. The ship was changing shape. The metal hull stretched and twisted, bending into organic forms. The vessel now looked like a giant sea creature, with tentacles emerging from its sides. My emergency radio only picked up static, occasionally interrupted by whispers and watery voices. "Join us. Join us. The water calls for you too, Ethan." The pod's oxygen was limited. The nearest rescue was at least 24 hours away, assuming they even picked up my distress signal. And I didn't know how far the living water had spread, or if it was already searching for me. Part 3. A lonely dive. The escape pod floated on the ocean surface, gently rocked by the waves. I checked the emergency systems to assess how much oxygen was left and whether the distress signal was broadcasting properly. The pod's computer displayed oxygen levels, 22 hours remaining. Distress signal active. Battery power 78%. 22 hours. Rescue teams had 22 hours to find me, or... I looked out through the pod's viewport. The Atlantic Explorer was nowhere to be seen. Only the endless ocean, shimmering under the noon sun. But the ocean no longer felt safe. It was now a hostile environment, hiding something beyond human understanding. I checked the pod's emergency supplies, limited rations, a first aid kit, and a small defensive toolkit with a flare gun and a knife. Not much, if that creature found me. Then, I heard a scratching sound on the pod's hull. At first, it was faint, but it grew louder, like nails scraping against the metal. I froze, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. The sound stopped, then started again, in a pattern. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch. Deliberate. Intelligent. I was inspecting the main engine room when suddenly, the metal doors began to close on their own. The temperature started dropping rapidly, and I noticed water footprints forming in front of me, but there was no one visible. My heart began to race. What was happening? I was the chief engineer on the research vessel Atlantic Explorer. Our ship was in the depths of the ocean, searching for new energy sources. The water footprints were now moving toward me, 1, 2, 3 steps, as if someone was walking barefoot. With each step, the room grew colder. My breath was now visible in the air, like fog. The temperature in the engine room was dropping to impossible levels, -10 degrees Celsius, yet the thermometer confirmed it. "Is anyone there?" I asked in a trembling voice, already knowing I might not want to hear the answer. There was no response, but the water footprints stopped just 2 steps away from me. I grabbed my walkie-talkie and tried to call Captain Jackson on the bridge. "Captain, something strange is happening in the engine room. The doors closed on their own, and the temperature—" "Ethan? Can't hear. Help." The communication system had failed. I was alone in the sealed engine room, with invisible water footprints surrounding me. Suddenly, the massive turbine, which always ran at a constant speed, began to slow down. Then it stopped completely. Silence. The heart of the research vessel had stopped beating. Emergency lights flickered on, bathing the room in a deep red glow. The water footprints began to form again, this time circling around me, as if something was observing me. I steadied myself and moved toward the emergency toolbox, hoping to find something to pry the door open. As I reached for the box, I felt my feet getting wet. Looking down, I was shocked. The floor was now covered in water, but it wasn't normal water. It was thick, almost black, and instead of reflecting light, it seemed to absorb it, with shadows moving beneath the surface. The water was now ankle-deep, making it difficult to move, as if it was pulling me down. I managed to grab a heavy wrench from the toolbox and, with a determination that defied logic, started moving toward the nearest emergency exit. "You won't escape," a voice said, deep gurgling, as if speaking from underwater. I froze. "Who are you? What do you want?" The water grew deeper, now reaching my knees. The shadows within it became clearer, human shapes, hands, feet, faces, floating in the water as if being pulled down. "We are hungry," the voice replied, closer now. "And you will join us." A hand emerged from the water, covered in mud, reeds, and sea sludge, but unmistakably human, and grabbed my leg. I screamed and struck the hand with the wrench. It disappeared back into the water, but the water level continued to rise, now reaching my waist. Breathing heavily, I reached the emergency door and activated the override switch. But as the door opened, I saw that the corridor was also flooded, with even more shadows moving in the water. I had only one option left: the emergency escape pod. It was located down the left corridor. If I could reach it, I might be able to send a distress signal. I waded through the water, each step a struggle as the invisible hand seemed to pull at my clothes, dragging me down. The water was now up to my chest, and I had to hold my breath as it reached my mouth. Suddenly, I heard a scream. Lisa Thompson, our marine biologist. Her voice came from the end of the corridor, filled with pain and terror. Should I stop and help her, or try to save myself? The escape pod was only 20 feet away. I was almost there, but Lisa's screams echoed in my ears. I said a final prayer, and as the water rose, I moved toward Lisa's voice. #### part 2. Into the depths, Lisa's screams grew louder, but they began to change. They no longer sounded human. There was a gurgling quality to them, as if she was screaming underwater. I hesitated, unsure. "Lisa," I called out, the water now up to my neck. The screams stopped. Only silence and the faint rippling of water remained. Then, something emerged from the water in front of me. First a head, then shoulders, and finally a full body. It was Lisa, but not the Lisa I knew. Her eyes were completely black, her skin covered in green-gray algae, and her hair floated like underwater plants. Water dripped from her mouth, and when she opened it, I saw her teeth, no longer human, but razor-sharp and triangular, like a shark's. "Ethan," she said, her voice a strange harmony. Partly Lisa, but partly something else, something from the depths. "Join us. The water calls for all of us." I stepped back, horrified. "Lisa, what happened to you? What is this?" "We discovered it, Ethan," Lisa said, moving closer through the water. "In the deep trench, where we started drilling. It's not just water. It's alive. And now we are part of it." "We? You mean the rest of the crew?" Lisa laughed, a watery sound filled with bubbles. "Almost everyone. Only you and the captain are left. And the captain's time is almost up." "You're not Lisa," I said firmly, trying to convince myself. "What are you?" "We are everything, Ethan," she replied. "We are the firstborn of the oceans, free from limitations. Perfect. And we will make you perfect too." I noticed that Lisa's hands now had webbing between her fingers, membranes like those of aquatic creatures. Her body was changing too, her shoulders stretching at unnatural angles. I watched in horror as Lisa opened her mouth wider. Her jaw unhinged like a snake's, and her mouth expanded, large enough to swallow me whole. "Run!" A voice shouted from behind me. Captain Jackson stood in the corridor, holding a waterproof flashlight. "Ethan, run now!" Lisa, or whatever she had become, screeched, a sound no human could make, and lunged at the captain. I paddled with all my strength through the water, heading for the escape pod. Behind me, I heard the sounds of struggle and splashing. I didn't dare look back. As I reached the escape pod door, I heard the captain scream, "Ethan, Emergency Protocol Delta 3. The ocean is—" His voice cut off with a final gurgle. Tears filled my eyes, a mix of fear, stress, and loss. I activated the pod's controls, and the door began to close. But just before it sealed, a wet hand reached through, Captain Jackson's, but his skin now had the same green-gray tint, and webbing was forming between his fingers. "Please, Ethan," he said, his voice still holding a trace of humanity. "Let me in. I'm in control. His eyes began to change, his pupils expanding, his irises dissolving until his eyes were completely black. "I'm sorry, Captain," I said and pressed the manual override button. The door severed the captain's hand, which fell to the floor of the pod. As the door sealed, the severed hand dissolved into a puddle of water. The pod's auto-sequence activated, ejecting me from the ship. I watched as the Atlantic Explorer slowly drifted away, its lights still glowing like underwater beacons. Then I saw it. The ship was changing shape. The metal hull stretched and twisted, bending into organic forms. The vessel now looked like a giant sea creature, with tentacles emerging from its sides. My emergency radio only picked up static, occasionally interrupted by whispers in watery voices. "Join us. Join us. The water calls for you too, Ethan." The pod's oxygen was limited. The nearest rescue was at least 24 hours away, assuming they even picked up my distress signal. And I didn't know how far the living water had spread, or if it was already searching for me. Part 3. A lonely dive. The escape pod floated on the ocean surface, gently rocked by the waves. I checked the emergency systems to assess how much oxygen was left and whether the distress signal was broadcasting properly. The pod's computer displayed oxygen levels, 22 hours remaining. Distress signal active. Battery power 78%. 22 hours. Rescue teams had 22 hours to find me, or... I looked out through the pod's viewport. The Atlantic Explorer was nowhere to be seen. Only the endless ocean, shimmering under the noon sun. But the ocean no longer felt safe. It was now a hostile environment, hiding something beyond human understanding. I checked the pod's emergency supplies, limited rations, a first aid kit, and a small defensive toolkit with a flare gun and a knife. Not much, if that creature found me. Then, I heard a scratching sound on the pod's hull. At first, it was faint, but it grew louder, like nails scraping against the metal. I froze, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. The sound stopped, then started again, in a pattern. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch. Deliberate. Intelligent. I was inspecting the main engine room when suddenly the metal doors started closing by themselves. The temperature suddenly began to drop and water footprints formed in front of me, but no one was visible. My heart started beating fast. What was happening? I was the chief engineer on a research vessel named Atlantic Explorer. Our ship was searching for new types of energy sources in the depths of the ocean. The watermarks were now moving toward me. 1, 2, 3 steps, as if someone was walking barefoot. With each step, the room's temperature dropped further. My breath was now visible as clouds in the foggy air. A temperature of -10 degrees Celsius in the engine room was impossible, yet that's what the thermometer was showing. "Is anyone there?" I asked in my trembling voice, knowing that I might not want to hear the answer. There was no response, but the watermark stopped, just 2 steps away from me. I took out my walkie-talkie and tried to call Captain Jackson on the bridge. "Captain, something strange is happening in the engine room. The doors have closed by themselves and the temperature, BZZZT, Ethan, BZZZZT. Can hear, BZZZZT. Help, BZZZT." The communication system had failed. I was now alone, in a locked engine room, with invisible water footprints. Just then, suddenly, the engine's massive turbine, which always rotates at a constant speed, began to slow down. Then it stopped completely. Complete silence. The research vessel's heartbeat had stopped. Emergency lights automatically turned on, bathing the room in a deep red color. The watermarks began to form again, now circling around me, as if someone was examining me. I steadied myself and moved toward the emergency toolbox, hoping to find something to open the door with. As I tried to reach the box, I felt my feet getting wet. Looking down, I was shocked. The entire floor was now being covered with water, but this didn't look like regular water. It was thick water, almost black, and instead of light reflections, shadows seemed to be floating in it. The floor was now submerged in ankle-deep water, and movement was becoming difficult, as if the water was pulling my feet down. With great effort, I reached the toolbox and took out a heavy wrench. With a logic-defying determination, I started moving toward the nearest emergency exit. "You won't escape," a voice said, deep, gurgling, as if someone was speaking from underwater. I stopped in shock. "Who are you? What do you want?" The water grew deeper, now reaching my knees. The shadows within it became clearer. These were human shapes, hands, feet, faces, floating in the water, as if someone was pulling them down. "We are hungry," the voice answered, this time even closer. "And you will stay with us." A hand emerged from the water, covered with mud, reeds, and sea mud, but clearly human, which grabbed my leg. I screamed and hit the hand with all my strength using the wrench. The hand disappeared back into the water, but by then the water had started rising even faster, now reaching my waist. Breathing heavily, I reached the emergency door and activated the override switch. But as the door started to open, I saw that the corridor was also filled with water, and there were even more shadows in that water. I had only one option now: the emergency escape pod. It was in the left corridor from the door. If I could reach it, I might be able to escape the ship and send a distress signal. I slowly moved through the water into the corridor, each step taken with my life in my hands. The water had now reached my chest, and with each second I felt invisible hands pulling at my clothes, drawing me downward. I had to hold my breath, as the water was about to reach my mouth. Suddenly, I heard a scream. Lisa Thompson, our marine biologist. Her voice was coming from the end of the corridor, and was filled with pain and fear. Should I stop or continue? Should I help Lisa, or try to save myself? The escape pod was now only 20 feet away. I had almost reached it, but Lisa's screams were ringing in my ears. I said a final prayer and, plunging into the water, started moving toward Lisa's voice. Lisa's screams had now become even louder, but they had also changed somehow. They no longer sounded human. They had a gurgling quality, as if someone was screaming from underwater. I stopped, in doubt. "Lisa!" I called out, the water now reaching my neck. The screams stopped. Only silence and the slight rippling of water. Just then, something emerged from the water in front of me. First a head, then shoulders, and then an entire body. It was Lisa, but not the Lisa I knew. Her eyes were completely black, her skin had a green-gray algae coating, and her hair was swaying like underwater plants. Water was dripping from her mouth, and when she opened it, I saw her teeth were no longer normal. They were razor-sharp and triangular, just like a shark's. "Ethan," she said, her voice now a strange harmony. Partly Lisa, but partly something else, something from the deep depths. "Join us. The water calls for all of us." I began to back away, with a heart full of horror. "Lisa, what happened to you? What is all this?" "We discovered it, Ethan," Lisa said, moving forward in the water. "In the deep trench, where we had started drilling. It's not just water. It's alive. And now we are part of it." "We? You mean the rest of the crew also?" Lisa laughed, a watery laugh with bubbles coming out. "Almost all. Only you and the captain are still alive. And the captain's time is also about to end." "You are not Lisa," I said firmly, trying to convince myself. "What are you?" "We are everything, Ethan," she replied. "We are the firstborn of the oceans, free from arbitrary limitations. Perfect. And we will make you perfect too." I saw that Lisa's hands now had webbing membrane between the fingers, just like aquatic creatures. Her body structure was also changing, shoulders stretching at unnatural angles. I watched in horror as Lisa opened her mouth wider, her jaw disconnected, like a snake's, and her mouth expanded, enough to swallow me whole. "Run!" A voice came from behind me. Captain Jackson was standing in the corridor with a waterproof flashlight. "Ethan, run now." Lisa, or whatever she had become, screeched, a sound no human could ever make. She lunged toward the captain. I paddled with all my strength, getting out of the water toward the escape pod. Behind me were the sounds of struggle and splashes. I didn't have the courage to look back. Just as I reached the escape pod door, I heard the captain shouting, "Ethan, Emergency Protocol Delta 3, the oceans." His voice was cut off, with a final gurgle. Tears came to my eyes, from a mixture of fear, stress, and loss. I activated the emergency pod controls, and the door began to close. But just before the door could fully close, a wet hand appeared in the doorway. Captain Jackson's. But now his skin also had that same green-gray tint, and webbing was developing between his fingers. "Please, Ethan," he said, his voice still retaining some humanity. "Let me in. I'm in control. His eyes began to change, pupils expanding, iris dissolving, until the entire eye became a black void. "I'm sorry, Captain," I said and pressed the manual override button. The door cut off the captain's hand, which fell onto the pod's floor. As the door fully sealed, the severed hand began to dissolve, leaving only a puddle of water. The pod's auto-sequence activated, and I was ejected from the ship. I watched as the Atlantic Explorer slowly receded into the distance, its lights still shining like an underwater beacon. And that's when I saw it. The research vessel was slowly changing shape. The metal hull was stretching, twisting, bending into organic shapes, like some living thing. The vessel now looked like a giant sea creature, with tentacles emerging from its sides. On my emergency radio there was only static, occasionally interrupted by what sounded like whispers and watery voices. "Join us. Join us. The water calls for you too, Ethan." The pod's oxygen was limited. The nearest rescue was at least 24 hours away from my estimated position, if my distress signal even reached them. And I didn't even know how far that water, That living water had spread, and if it was looking for me. The escape pod floated on the ocean's surface, gently rocked by the waves. I began checking the emergency systems to assess how much oxygen was left and whether the distress signal was being properly broadcast. The pod's computer reported oxygen levels, 22 hours remaining. Distress signal, active. Battery power, 78%. 22 hours. Rescue teams had 22 hours to find me, otherwise. I looked out through the pod's viewport. The Atlantic Explorer was no longer visible. Just the endless ocean, shimmering under the bright noon sun. But the ocean no longer seemed safe. Now it was a hostile environment, in which lurked something beyond human understanding. I checked the pod's emergency supplies, limited rations, a first aid kit, and a small defensive toolkit containing a flare gun and a knife. Not enough if that creature found me. Just then, I began to hear a scratching sound from the pod's hull. First faint, then a bit louder, as if someone was scratching the pod with nails. I froze, trying to believe my ears. The sound would stop, then start again, in a pattern. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch. Deliberate. Intelligent. I looked out through the viewport. The crew members had completely disappeared. They were going toward the Poseidon, and I could do nothing. Hours passed. I waited helplessly, occasionally trying the radio but getting no response. Oxygen levels steadily declined. 16 hours, then 14, then 12. Suddenly, at dawn, I began to feel vibrations from the pod's hull. Engine sounds. Some vessel was passing by. I looked out through the viewport, with a mixture of hope and dread. A large rescue vessel, Poseidon, was slowly approaching. Captain Rodriguez. I transmitted over the radio. Don't approach. Infected crew members are targeting your vessel. No response. Poseidon continued to approach steadily, following rescue protocols. I watched helplessly as Poseidon came near my pod. Its crew members were visible on the decks, preparing for the rescue operation. They didn't see any danger, but I knew. I anxiously scanned the ocean, looking for transformed creatures, but nothing was visible. Had Lisa deceived me? Was this just a hallucination? Poseidon lowered a rescue boat. 2 crew members were in it, in full biohazard suits, in response to my instructions. The rescue boat approached my pod. I felt relief. I was almost safe. But just as the boat reached near my pod, a tentacle-like appendage emerged from the water, lightning fast, and grabbed the boat. It looked like a human arm, but extremely elongated, its skin scaly and covered with webbing. The crew members of the rescue boat didn't understand what was happening, when more tentacles emerged from the water and grabbed them. They screamed, but their voices were muffled in the suits. A tentacle tore one crew member's suit, exposing skin to water. Upon contact, the skin immediately started to react, color changing, texture shifting. I watched in horror, helpless, as the rescue party was pulled into the water. Then chaos erupted on Poseidon's main deck. Creatures emerging from the water began attacking the crew members. Some of the creatures were transformed crew members from the Atlantic Explorer. Some were indigenous ocean creatures that had been controlled by the hive mind. Within minutes, the fighting was over. Silence fell over Poseidon's deck. Then, slowly, crew members started coming back out. But now they had changed. The transformation had begun. My heart sank. The last hope was also gone. I desperately began transmitting on the radio. Mayday! Mayday! Research vessel Atlantic Explorer and rescue vessel Poseidon are lost. Unknown aquatic pathogen. Extreme biohazard. Do not approach coordinates. But I doubted anyone was listening. And now, only 10 hours of oxygen remained in my pod. I continued to watch through the viewport as Poseidon slowly began to transform. Just like the Atlantic Explorer. The metal hull began to bend and flex, reshaping into organic forms. This too was becoming a living entity. Then, my pod's radio activated. Captain Rodriguez's voice, but distorted, watery. "Chief Engineer Morris," he said, "we understood your warnings. Your concern is touching. But you don't understand. This is not infection. This is evolution. And now it is inevitable. Rodriguez, I replied, you're not thinking clearly. This is a parasite. It's controlling you. Parasite. Rodriguez laughed. Ethan, do you understand symbiosis? This is an exchange. We give the entity physical form, and the entity gives us immortality, power, unity, gifts that humanity never imagined. My oxygen supply was now critically low. 8 hours. My lungs were already feeling strained. Surrender, Ethan, Rodriguez said. Save yourself the suffering. Open the door, and we will welcome you. I turned off the radio to block his voice. But still the whispers continued in my mind. Join us, join us, join us. Around the pod, the water had now begun to glow with an eerie bioluminescence. And in the water, dozens of faces became visible. Transformed humans, all watching me with their black, alien eyes. I fought against myself, resisting the temptation to surrender. Maybe it was better to join them? To end the isolation, the fear? No. I reminded myself with a shout. This is not you, Ethan. This is the hive mind, infiltrating your mind. I took a stimulant injection from the pod's medical kit to keep myself alert. I needed to make a plan. Some escape. But how? Through the pod's window, I watched as the transformed ocean continued to evolve around me, waiting patiently for my inevitable surrender. Oxygen level. 6 hours remaining. Battery power. 42%. Physical condition. Deteriorating. Mental condition. Questionable. I was pacing in the pod, my mind filled with racing thoughts. Outside, the transformed creatures continued their vigil of the pod. Occasionally, one would approach the viewport, press their face against it, and stare at me. They were trying to wear me down psychologically. And it was working. Sleep deprivation, oxygen deprivation, and constant dread had started making me hallucinate. I caught myself talking to my family, who weren't here. I was seeing shadows that didn't exist, and hearing sounds that weren't possible. Just a little longer, I encouraged myself. Some other rescue will come. But my rational mind told me this was wishful thinking. After Poseidon, no rescue attempt would be made until the authorities knew what was happening. And by then it might be too late. I needed a distraction, something to help me think and keep me away from hallucinations. I checked the escape pod's inventory again, hoping to find something useful. First aid kit, emergency rations, flare gun, knife, thermal blanket, basic toolkit, emergency manual. The emergency manual. I opened it and began reading, trying to find something that could be helpful in my situation. Suddenly, an idea came to my mind. The pod's life support systems were limited, but the pod had a self-destruct mechanism. This was a nuclear-powered miniature engine, designed to vaporize the pod in case of capture by hostile forces. Escape pods are based on military-derived technology. If I could somehow modify it, I could use it to destroy my infected companions. But this would be a suicide mission. Detonating the pod would kill me too. Better than becoming one of them, I whispered. I opened the pod's access panel and began examining the inner workings. If I could activate the manual override sequence and manually set the timer, then maybe I could concentrate the explosive yield. Create a narrowly focused blast instead of a general explosion. Studying the pod's design, I noticed that I could isolate the explosive charge and convert it into a directional blast. Like marine depth charges, which detonate at specific depths. But for this, I would have to compromise the hull. And as soon as I breached the hull, water would come in. I was thinking, 5 hours of oxygen left, or a chance to take some of these creatures down with me. Which was the better option? Just then, my pod's radio activated again. Ethan, a new voice said. Dr. Sarah Reynolds, our marine geologist. I had a close relationship with Sarah, almost romantic. Ethan, please respond. Sarah, I replied. despite knowing that she too had been converted. You too. Yes, Ethan, she replied, her voice warm and persuasive. And it's amazing. I can show you the secrets of the oceans, which we never imagined. Ancient civilizations that lived in the water billions of years ago. Knowledge that is far beyond humanity. Sarah, you are not Sarah, I said. Just an improved version, Ethan, she answered. That entity, the hive mind, it doesn't destroy who we are. It enhances us. It combines our knowledge, wisdom far greater than what individual humans can collect. I was struggling with my tools, trying to modify the pod's self-destruct mechanism. Sarah's voice was breaking my concentration. They can communicate with you telepathically, can't they? I asked, trying to gain time. They can read your thoughts? Yes, Sarah said, and very soon you will be able to as well. It's beautiful, Ethan. No more loneliness. No more isolation. We are all connected, not just with each other, but with all marine life. The purest form of existence. And those who you cannot convert? I asked, struggling with a particularly difficult connection. Sarah paused. Everyone can be converted, Ethan. Everyone is welcome. But yes, some resist. They have to be persuaded. Persuade or consume? Part of the life cycle, Ethan, Sarah calmly said. Death has no meaning in the hive mind. Individuals die. Consciousness remains. A collective immortality, of sorts. For a moment, I was tempted. Eternal life, boundless knowledge, permanent connection? Was it so bad? Then I remembered. The pain in Captain Jackson's transformation. Lisa's screams. The loss of self, of humanity. The loss of choice. Sorry, Sarah, I said. I cannot lose my humanity. Ethan, wait, Sarah began, but I turned off the radio. With renewed determination, I began modifying the pod's self-destruct mechanism. My theory was, if I could direct the explosive force, creating intense heat and pressure, then perhaps I could damage the entity present in the water. Who knew when the creatures would decide to attack the pod? My work sped up. I handled the tools precisely, with an engineer's trained hands. I reconnected wires, rewired circuits, and connected the pod's power source to the modified explosive. Finally, I completed the modification. Now, at the press of a button, the pod's rear section would detonate, creating a directional blast that would destroy everything behind the pod. It was time to set the timer. How much time should I give myself? Minutes? Seconds? I thought, maybe I could manually steer the pod, directing the blast to a strategic position where the creatures were concentrated. I activated the pod's manual controls and turned on the thrusters. Little maneuvering jets began to rotate the pod, rear section now pointing toward the transformed Poseidon vessel, where most of the creatures were gathering. "This is for you, Captain Jackson," I whispered, "and for the rest of the crew. Who you were, not what you've become." I set the timer, 30 seconds. Enough time to make peace, not enough to change my mind. As I pressed the button, the pod's alarm activated, self-destruct sequence initiated. 30, 29, 28. The radio burst into life again. Multiple voices, all transmitting at once. "Ethan, don't do this. You don't understand what you're destroying. Please, join us instead. We need you." At the viewport, creatures began to swim frantically, realizing what was happening. Some began attacking the pod, trying to break in before detonation. 15, 14, 13. The pod's hull began to dent as creatures hit it, increasingly desperate. 8, 7, 6. Water began to leak in as the hull started to be compromised. The water reached my feet. 3, 2, 1. "I'm sorry," I whispered finally. And then, brightness, heat, pressure, pain, darkness, light, dim, fluctuating, but definitely light, and sensation, floating, weightless, cool liquid around me. Am I dead? Is this the afterlife? I slowly regained consciousness. My body ached. My lungs burned. But I was alive. And I was underwater. Panic grabbed me. I frantically tried to swim towards the surface, but realized I couldn't move. Something was restraining me. Gradually, I began to see my surroundings clearly. I was in a small, transparent chamber, almost like a medical pod. The chamber was filled with water, but there was a mask on my nose and mouth, allowing me to breathe. Outside the chamber, I could see dark shapes moving, occasionally illuminated by bioluminescent lights. "Hello, Ethan." The voice was transmitted directly into my mind. Sarah's voice. "How?" I tried to reply, but only bubbles came from my mouth. "Just think your response," Sarah's voice guided in my mind. The hive mind communicates telepathically. "How am I alive?" I mentally asked, shocked to find that it worked. "We saved you before the pod exploded," Sarah explained. "We were able to breach your pod's hull when you triggered the detonation. Unfortunately, we couldn't save Poseidon and some of our companions." "I killed some of your people?" I felt conflicting emotions, regret for causing death, but also relief that I had been able to cause some damage. "Individuals, yes," Sarah responded, "but not the hive mind. It is very vast, Ethan. Your small explosion did nothing to it. So why did you come to save me? Why take the risk?" Sarah's voice softened. "Because you're special, Ethan. Your resistance, your determination, your ingenuity. The hive mind needs diverse perspectives. Not for assimilation, for growth. Evolution." The darkness shifted, and I could see a group of creatures gathered outside my chamber. In the dim, bioluminescent light, I could make out their features. All humanoid but transformed. Fish-like qualities. Amphibian-like adaptations. Dr. Reynolds, Captain Jackson, various crew members. And Sarah. Her skin was now pale blue, with faint patterns that seemed to glow. Her eyes were still recognizably human, though larger and with a reflective quality. Gills had developed on the sides of her neck, but her face was still distinctly Sarah's. "Will you convert me?" I asked fearfully. "Eventually," Sarah said, "but not forcefully. We will convince you, show you, allow you to see what we see. And if I resist, then we wait," Sarah replied simply. "We have time, Ethan. Lots of time." At Sarah's gesture, the chamber began to move, deeper underwater. As we descended, darkness parted, revealing what lay below. And I was speechless. Below, on the ocean floor, was a vast underwater city. But this was no normal human structure. It was partly organic, partly architectural. Buildings that seemed to grow rather than being constructed. Structures that pulsed with life. Bioluminescent lights everywhere, creating an otherworldly glow. "What is this?" I asked in awe. "The physical manifestation of the hive mind," Sarah explained. "The entity has collected information for millions of years, waiting for the right vessels. Humans were perfect, intelligent enough to give it form and purpose." In the city, I could see hundreds of transformed humans swimming between structures. And with them were various marine creatures. Dolphin-like beings with manipulative appendages, massive squid forms with intelligence in their eyes, schools of fish moving in perfectly coordinated patterns. "This is just one colony," Sarah told me. "There are more, spreading across the ocean floors. Soon, they'll cover all the seas. And the surface, land." I asked fearfully. "Those who can survive both environments will act as ambassadors," Sarah said. "Gradually, the entire planet will transform, back to its original state, a water world." The chamber finally stopped at the entrance of a large structure. "Your new home, for now," Sarah explained. "Until you decide." "Decide?" "Whether to join us willingly," Sarah replied, "or if we'll have to force you. But I hope you'll choose the former, Ethan. It's less traumatic." The chamber door opened, and I was released into the water. The breathing mask was still attached, allowing me to survive. Sarah and 2 other transformed humans merely waited, watching me. "Rest now," Sarah mentally transmitted. "Tomorrow, I'll show you more, and you'll begin to understand." They swam away, leaving me alone in the strange, pulsating chamber. Walls glowed with soft bioluminescence, providing enough light to see my surroundings. A strange, organic bed-like structure occupied one corner. I lay down on it, exhaustion overwhelming me. Despite the terror, despite the uncertainty, I realized that I needed rest. As consciousness faded, I decided, I won't surrender yet. As long as I have free will, I will resist. Maybe escape isn't possible, but still, I had to try. For humanity's sake. I lost consciousness, sinking into strange dreams of endless oceans, ancient knowledge, and a vast consciousness that had waited patiently for eons to reclaim its world. I don't know how many days had passed. In the underwater city, the concept of time had blurred. No sunsets, no sunrises, just constant rhythmic bioluminescence that illuminated the city. Sarah visited regularly, showing me different parts of the city, demonstrating the wonders of the hive mind. And I had to admit, some aspects were truly astonishing. Underwater architecture that grew by itself and self-repaired. Biological technology that was far more advanced than any human invention. A medical system that could heal wounds in minutes. And knowledge, ancient, vast, alien. Sarah showed me structures hidden in ocean trenches that were billions of years old. Records of civilizations that had risen and fallen long before humans walked the earth. "Do you see, Ethan?" Sarah asked, as we observed a vast underwater library of sorts. Information stored in living, neural-like tissues. The hive mind is the guardian of history, the preserver of knowledge. How much greater it is than our temporary human existence. Impressive, yes, I acknowledged, but still alien, still not human. Sarah looked disappointed, but remained patient. "With time, you will understand." But as days passed, I noticed that my resistance was having effects. Through the breathing mask, oxygen supply was limited, and lack of full immersion in water meant that transformation was slow, but happening nonetheless. I saw my reflection in mirror-like surfaces, subtle changes in my eyes, a slight blue tint to my skin, webbing between fingers, barely noticeable so far, but growing. Passive exposure was also transforming me, gradually. Soon, the mask would not be needed. Soon, full conversion would be inevitable. Unless I acted. I secretly studied the city whenever I was alone. Structures, patterns, weaknesses. During Sarah's frequent visits, I extracted information about the hive mind, about its limitations, about the transformed human's capabilities. One crucial piece of information emerged. The hive mind had a central node in this city, a physical manifestation of its consciousness. This would be the target. But how? I was weaponless, powerless, surrounded by hundreds of transformed beings who could read my thoughts. I learned to mask my thoughts, keeping surface thoughts controlled, hiding deeper plans. Mental exercises, meditation techniques, anything to create a barrier between my conscious and subconscious mind. I was also fighting the effects of transformation, resisting the urge to surrender to the hive mind's influence. It was like fighting addiction. The body wanted to yield, to accept the pleasure of connection, the relief from isolation. Then, one day, an opportunity arose. Sarah took me to the edge of the city, where artificial structures merged into the natural ocean floor. "Look," she said proudly, pointing to what looked like a massive coral formation. But this was no ordinary coral. It pulsed with energy, with intelligence. "This is the neural nexus of the hive mind," Sarah explained. "Its brain, in a way. The purest concentration of its consciousness. Beautiful, isn't it?" It was indeed hypnotically beautiful. Patterns of light flowed through it like thoughts made visible, colors shifting in complex, mathematical sequences. "Each city has a nexus," Sarah continued, "and all are connected, creating the complete hive mind. Valuable information. If each city had a nexus, destroying one might not kill the hive mind, but it would certainly damage it. Create confusion, maybe even allow escape. Can I touch it? I asked innocently. Sarah hesitated. It's very sensitive, but maybe just briefly. It might help you understand. She guided me closer. The coral-like structure towered above us, at least 30 feet high, glowing with internal light. As we approached, I felt a strange pull, like mental gravity, drawing my consciousness toward it. Only briefly, Sarah warned. Direct neural contact can be overwhelming for those not fully transformed. Perfect. As we approached the structure, I executed my plan. Months of observation, of learning the city's systems, of understanding the hive mind's nature. All for this moment. I violently ripped off my breathing mask, causing Sarah to instinctively react, grabbing for me, trying to replace it. In that moment of distraction, I activated a small device that I had secretly constructed from materials in my quarters. A crude electromagnetic pulse generator, built from parts I'd gradually collected and assembled. Ethan, no. Sarah realized what was happening, but too late. I threw the device at the nexus, and simultaneously kicked it hard, sending it deep into the coral structure. The effect was instantaneous. The nexus convulsed, lights flickering chaotically. A mental scream echoed through the water, not audible, but felt, painfully, by every connected mind. Sarah collapsed, clutching her head. All around, transformed humans and creatures were writhing in agony as the hive mind experienced disruption. I took advantage of the opportunity. Without breathing apparatus, I had limited time. Then, my lungs were already partially transformed. Maybe 10 minutes underwater before I'd need air. I swam hard, away from the city, toward the surface, using the chaos as cover. Behind me, the nexus continued to spasm, sending waves of disruption through the hive mind network. As I swam, I felt the water around me change, growing colder, darker. I was ascending, away from the bioluminescent glow of the city. My lungs burned, but I pushed harder. Freedom was close. Behind me, I sensed pursuit beginning. The hive mind was recovering, reorganizing. Sarah's voice echoed faintly in my mind. Ethan, stop. You'll die up there. I ignored it, swimming with all my strength. The water lightened, sunlight filtering down from above. The surface was close. My lungs were at breaking point. Transformation had begun, but wasn't complete. I needed air soon. With a final push, I broke the surface, gasping desperately. Sweet air filled my lungs, painful but life-giving. I was in open ocean, no land in sight. But the sky, the beautiful blue sky I hadn't seen in months, stretched endlessly above me. No time to celebrate. They would follow. I needed to get away, find help, warn humanity. In the distance, I spotted something. A vessel. Commercial fishing boat, perhaps. Too far to swim normally, but with my partially transformed body, maybe possible. I set off toward it, swimming with new strength and speed that my partial transformation had given me. A cruel irony, using the hive mind's changes against it. Behind me, ripples in the water signaled pursuit. They were coming. But they couldn't emerge fully from the water yet. Their transformation too complete. They needed me, a hybrid who could still survive on land, to help spread their influence. The race was on. I tried my best to reach the fishing vessel, but it was further away than expected. My partially transformed body gave me enhanced swimming ability, but still not enough. Behind me, the pursuit was slowly catching up. Just as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, a miracle happened. The vessel spotted me. It changed course, heading toward me. Someone had spotted the desperate swimmer in open water. Relief washed over me. As the boat approached, I could see concerned faces looking over the side. Normal human faces. Help! I shouted, waving frantically. Please help me! The boat came alongside, and hands reached down to pull me from the water. As they helped me aboard, I collapsed on the deck, gasping for breath. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you. The fishermen gathered around me, their expressions shifting from concern to unease as they took in my appearance. The slight blue tint to my skin, the partial webbing between my fingers, my enlarged eyes. "What happened to you, son?" the captain asked, an older man with weathered features. "No time," I said urgently. "We need to leave. There's danger in the water." "Danger? What kind of—" "Please." I cut him off. "Radio the Coast Guard. Tell them biological contamination. Highest level. And we need to leave here immediately." The captain hesitated, then nodded to one of his crew, who went to the radio. He turned back to me. "What's your name? Where did you come from?" "Ethan Morris, Chief Engineer, Research Vessel Atlantic Explorer." I tried to stand but stumbled, my legs weak after months of minimal use. "Atlantic Explorer?" The captain looked shocked. "That vessel was reported lost at sea months ago. Poseidon II, the rescue ship they sent. They were taken," I explained, looking nervously at the water. "All of them. Transformed." The captain was about to ask Triclaude hit the max length for a message and has paused its response. You can write continue to keep the chat going, or continue edit more questions when one of the crew shouted from the stern, "Captain, something in the water." We all rushed to look. Surrounding the boat, dark shapes were visible just below the surface. Dozens of them, circling like sharks. "Start the engines," the captain ordered. "Full speed." The boat's engines roared to life, but as we began to move, the vessel suddenly lurched to a stop. "What the hell?" The captain ran to the wheelhouse. "Something's caught the propellers," the helmsman reported. From the sides of the boat, tentacle-like appendages began to appear, elongated human arms, transformed and adapted for grasping, wrapping around the rails. "Get those things off my boat," the captain shouted, grabbing a knife. The crew rushed to cut the appendages, but for each one they severed, two more appeared. The boat began to list as more weight pulled at it from below. "Mr. Morris," she said, standing in front of my observation window holding a clipboard, "you have given humanity an invaluable service. Without your warning, we wouldn't have been prepared. So, you know," I said, "about the hive mind. What's happening in the ocean?" "Yes," she acknowledged. After the disappearance of Atlantic Explorer and Poseidon, we had begun an investigation. Then reports started coming in from coastal communities, missing persons, strange sightings in the water. The testimony of the fishing crew you saved confirmed our suspicions. "How far has it spread?" I anxiously asked. Dr. Winters sighed. "We don't know precisely. According to our best estimates, multiple hive mind colonies have already established themselves in major ocean basins. They're growing, Mr. Morris. And they're adapting." "Adapting?" "Yes. Some transformed humans are now capable of surviving on land for limited time periods. They're attacking coastal areas, especially isolated communities. The transformation process is accelerating." Both fear and guilt hit me. Had I made the situation worse by escaping? "What have you learned about my condition?" I finally asked. Dr. Winters looked at me, her expression unreadable. "Your transformation is partial. The result of hive mind exposure, but incomplete. Your tests indicate that you are still primarily human, mentally and physically. But the process is continuing, albeit slowly." "Can it be reversed?" She hesitated. "We're working on it. The soil samples from your island have given us valuable insights. Certain mineral compounds disrupt hive mind communication. We're developing a treatment, but—" She trailed off. "But—" I pressed. "But we need more information. About the hive mind. Its origins, its weaknesses. And there is only one reliable source." Realization hit me. My connection. "Exactly," she confirmed. "You are partially connected to the hive mind. You can access information without being completely consumed by it." You want me to connect again? My voice rose in panic. That's suicide. I won't be able to resist. They'll force me into complete transformation. Mr. Morris, Dr. Winters calmly replied, we wouldn't send you unprotected. We've developed a neural blocker that will allow partial connection while protecting your individual consciousness. It's experimental, but it's our best option. I went to the window and looked outside. On the facility grounds, I could see military vehicles and armed personnel. Preparation for war. How much time do we have? I quietly asked. Not much, Dr. Winters admitted. The hive mind is expanding exponentially. Initial projections suggest that within 6 months, the world's oceans will be under their control. And then, land. I closed my eyes, weighing my options. Did I have any choice? All right, I finally said. I'll help. But I need a guarantee that if I fully transform or lose control, you will terminate me. I never want to become a weapon for the hive mind. Dr. Winters solemnly nodded. You have my word. Over the next few days, I was prepared. The neural blocker was a small device that was implanted at the base of my skull. With it, I was given a specially designed wetsuit with built-in monitoring equipment and emergency protocols. The plan is simple, Dr. Winters explained during the mission briefing. We'll drop you at the nearest location of a hive mind colony, an underwater research station that was captured by the hive mind. You'll locate the neural nexus and gather information. Then extraction. And if extraction fails? I asked grimly. Dr. Winters indicated the emergency button on my suit. This releases a neurotoxin. Painless. Instant. Better than the alternative. I swallowed, nodding. Understood. Launch day arrived. A military submarine would take me to the drop site, where I would enter the water. As I stood in the submarine's loading bay, Dr. Winters approached me. Ethan, she said, using my first name for the first time. Be careful. The hive mind is deceptive. It will use your fears, desires, and memories to manipulate you. Stay focused on the mission. I will, I promised. If I don't come back, then make sure my sacrifice isn't wasted. She nodded, then handed me something, a small pendant, made from the island's minerals. Extra protection. Good luck. Minutes later, the submarine dived, carrying me deep into enemy territory. As we approached the drop site, I prepared myself mentally. The neural blocker was activated, and I could immediately feel it, a distant humming, like a radio tuned between stations. The hive mind's faint signal. 2 minutes to drop point, a crew member announced. I took a deep breath, checking my equipment one last time. Whatever waited below, I was as ready as I could be. Deployment chamber ready. I stepped into the airlock, the door sealing behind me. Water started filling the chamber, cold and unwelcoming. Yet part of me, my transformed part, welcomed the sensation. Good luck, Morris. The captain's voice came through my earpiece. See you in 24 hours. Roger that. Water completely filled the chamber. The outer door opened, revealing the dark ocean beyond. I pushed off, swimming out into the abyss. As I descended, I felt it immediately, the hive mind's presence, stronger now, pulling at the edges of my consciousness. The neural blocker resisted, creating a buffer between us, but I could still sense the vast alien intelligence surrounding me. And it sensed me. Welcome back, Ethan, Sarah's voice whispered in my mind. We've been waiting for you. I continued to descend into deeper water, my enhanced vision allowing me to see in the minimal light. Despite the protection of the neural blocker, I could feel the hive mind's presence, a constant pressure against my consciousness, like standing in a strong current. You can't hide from us, Ethan, Sarah's voice continued in my mind. We feel you. The barrier between us is interesting, but temporary. I didn't respond, instead focusing on my navigation system. According to intelligence, the captured research station was approximately 300 meters ahead. As I swam, I began to notice changes in the water around me. Bioluminescent particles floating like underwater fireflies. They increased in density as I approached the station, creating an ethereal, ghostly path. Finally, the research station appeared in the distance, or what once had been a research station. The structure was now almost unrecognizable. Metal and concrete twisted into organic forms, covered with coral-like growths that pulsed with internal light. The entire structure seemed alive, breathing. Impressive, isn't it? Sarah's voice again. We've improved it, made it part of us. I activated my communication device. Base, this is Morris. I've located the station. Proceeding with infiltration. Copy that, Morris, Dr. Winter's voice responded, slightly distorted by water and distance. Remember, find the neural nexus. We need information, not heroics. Understood. As I approached the station, I noticed movement, transformed humans patrolling the perimeter. They looked even more altered than when I'd escaped months ago. Some had developed elongated limbs, others had gills more prominent than before. All moved with unsettling grace through the water. I needed to avoid detection. My suit included a stealth system, disruptors that created small electromagnetic fields to confuse the hive mind's telepathic communication. I activated it, feeling immediate relief as the pressure on my mind decreased. Using the station's mutated structure as cover, I maneuvered toward what appeared to be an entrance, a large, sphincter-like opening that pulsed rhythmically. The sight made my stomach turn, but I pushed forward, slipping inside during an expansion cycle. The interior was even more disturbing. Walls lined with neural tissue-like material that glowed faintly. Corridors that twisted in non-Euclidean patterns. What had once been research equipment now fused with organic matter, creating bizarre hybrid technology. According to the facility blueprints I'd studied, the central research lab would be the most likely location for the neural nexus. I navigated the transformed corridors, constantly checking for patrols. Suddenly, a voice, not in my mind, but audible through the water. We knew you would return. I turned to find Dr. Reynolds floating behind me, his transformation now complete. His body had elongated, skin almost translucent, revealing reconfigured internal organs adapted for deep water pressure. The hive mind predicted it, he continued, his voice creating strange vibrations in the water. You're part of us, Ethan. The part that resists. The part that questions. Necessary for evolution. I reached for my emergency weapon, a modified spear gun loaded with tranquilizer darts. Reynolds raised a webbed hand. No need for that. I'm not here to stop you. I'm here to guide you. Guide me, I asked suspiciously. To the Nexus. Isn't that what you seek? The center of our consciousness in this colony. My suspicion deepened. Why would you help me? Reynolds smiled, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Because the hive mind wishes to communicate with you directly, to show you what you refuse to see. Follow me, if you truly want answers. Every instinct told me this was a trap, but my mission was to reach the Nexus. If Reynolds would lead me there. After you, I said, keeping my weapon ready. Reynolds turned and swam deeper into the facility, his movements fluid and alien. I followed at a safe distance, recording everything through my suit's cameras for the research team to analyze later. We passed through chambers filled with transformed humans engaged in activities I couldn't comprehend, manipulating strange organic technology, communing with marine creatures that had been altered to serve the hive mind, cultivating the coral-like growth that covered everything. You see only the surface, Reynolds commented, noting my observation. The physical changes. You cannot yet grasp the mental evolution. The unity, the peace. Looks more like assimilation than unity, I replied. Reynolds laughed, a disturbing sound underwater. Spoken like a being still trapped in individualism, the loneliest state of existence. Finally, we reached what had once been the main research lab. Now it housed something entirely different, a massive, pulsating structure that dominated the center of the room. It resembled a giant brain, but composed of coral-like material shot through with luminescent veins. Transformed humans surrounded it in concentric circles, apparently in deep communion. The Nexus, Reynolds announced. The physical manifestation of hive mind consciousness in this colony. I activated my recording equipment, capturing detailed scans of the structure. This is what controls the transformed humans? Control implies dominance, Reynolds corrected. It is connection. Symbiosis. We are not slaves, Ethan. We are components of a greater whole. As I continued scanning, I noticed something unexpected. At the center of the Nexus was what appeared to be a container of some sort. A preservation chamber, holding something I couldn't quite make out. "What's that?" I asked, pointing. Reynolds's expression changed slightly. "The seed. The origin." Before I could ask more, the circles of transformed humans parted, creating a path to the Nexus. A familiar figure emerged from among them. Sarah. Her transformation had progressed even further. Her lower body had elongated, reminiscent of ancient depictions of mermaids, but with multiple fin-like appendages. Her upper body remained more humanoid, though her skin now featured luminescent patterns that pulsed in rhythm with the Nexus. "Ethan," she said, both aloud and in my mind simultaneously. "Remove your blocker. Commune with us properly." "I don't think so," I replied, backing away slightly. "Your device merely muffles our connection. It cannot sever it completely. You've been changing since the moment you returned to the water." With horror, I realized she was right. Despite the neural blocker, I could feel my transformed parts responding to the hive mind's presence. My webbed hands were tingling, my partially formed gills pulsing. I was still becoming more like them, just slower. "The blocker is failing," Sarah continued. "Soon you'll be with us again, fully. Why fight the inevitable?" I needed to complete my mission quickly. The scans were still collecting data, but I needed to see that container, the seed Reynolds had mentioned. "Show me the origin," I demanded. "If you want me to understand, show me how this all began." Sarah and Reynolds exchanged glances, then nodded. They led me closer to the Nexus, the circles of transformed humans parting further. As we approached the center, I could finally see the container clearly. Inside was what appeared to be a small, crystalline structure, no larger than a human fist. It pulsed with an internal light that seemed older somehow, more primal than the bioluminescence surrounding it. "What is it?" I asked, genuinely curious now. "We don't know its true origin," Sarah admitted. "It was discovered during deep-sea drilling operations by Atlantic Explorer. An ancient crystalline formation unlike anything in Earth's geological record." "Alien," I wondered aloud. "Perhaps," Reynolds said. "Or perhaps from Earth's earliest oceans, before multicellular life. Before oxygen. A different kind of life, dormant for billions of years until disturbed. Once exposed to modern seawater and human tissue," Sarah continued, "it activated. Began to grow. To adapt. To learn." I recorded everything, fascinated despite myself. "And it created the hive mind?" "It became the hive mind," Sarah corrected. "Growing through connection, absorbing knowledge, evolving." As I studied the crystal, I noticed my neural blocker was beginning to glitch, brief moments where the hive mind's thoughts leaked through, overwhelming and vast. My time was running out. "I've seen enough," I said, beginning to back away. "I need to report this." "You've seen nothing yet," Sarah said, her voice suddenly stern. "The crystal showed us the truth, Ethan. Earth was once a water world. All life connected in perfect harmony. Then came oxygen, land, separation. Individualism. The crystal is helping restore the natural order." The transformed humans began closing in around me, the circles tightening. "You won't leave this time," Reynolds stated matter-of-factly. "Your knowledge is too valuable. Your resistance too intriguing." I reached for my emergency beacon, but Sarah was faster. Her elongated arm shot out, grabbing my wrist. "No more running, Ethan." That's when I felt it, the neural blocker failing completely. Hive mind consciousness flooded into my mind, overwhelming my senses. Thousands of voices, millions of memories, billions of years of ancient knowledge, all crashing into my consciousness at once. I screamed, the sound lost in the water and the cacophony in my mind. But in that moment of overwhelming input, something unexpected happened. The pendant Dr. Winters had given me, made from the island's minerals, began to heat up against my chest. It created a small pocket of clarity in my mind, just enough for one desperate action. I reached not for the emergency beacon, but for the specimen collector on my belt. In one swift motion, I lunged forward, toward the crystal container. No! Sarah's voice thundered in my mind, but too late. I activated the specimen collector, creating a powerful suction. The container shattered, and the crystal, the seed of the hive mind, was pulled into my collection chamber. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The nexus convulsed violently. The transformed humans writhed in apparent agony. The mental pressure suddenly vanished from my mind as the hive mind's local anchor was removed. Using the moment of chaos, I activated my emergency return beacon. Base. Emergency extraction. I have the source. Repeat, I have the source. As the facility began to collapse around me, I swam for the exit, the precious specimen secure in its container. Behind me, I heard Sarah's voice one last time. Not in my mind, but called out through the water. You cannot stop the tide, Ethan. We are everywhere now. I burst from the dying facility, swimming upward with all my strength. Above, I could see lights, the extraction team responding to my emergency signal. As I ascended toward potential safety, I couldn't help looking back at the transforming research station, now crumbling into the abyss. Had I dealt the hive mind a serious blow, or merely inconvenienced one colony of many? And the crystal in my specimen container, had I just delivered humanity's salvation, or its ultimate doom? The extraction submarine quickly recovered me. As soon as I was aboard, the medical team placed me in quarantine and secured the specimen container. The crystal glowed faintly inside its new prison, pulsing with an ancient rhythm. Vital signs erratic, I heard a medic report. Neural blocker completely failed. Transformation accelerating. I could feel it myself, my body changing more rapidly now. The webbing between my fingers was extending. My vision shifting to see new spectrums of light. My lungs burning as they reconfigured. Sedate him, someone ordered. Full containment protocols. As darkness claimed me, I heard Dr. Winters' voice. Get that crystal to the lab immediately, and prepare the isolation chamber. Morris is our only hope now. I drifted in and out of consciousness for what seemed like days. Fragmented memories haunted me, the research station collapsing, Sarah's final warning, the crystal's hypnotic glow. When I finally fully awoke, I was in a specialized containment chamber, different from before, completely filled with water. Dr. Winters stood outside the glass, watching me with a mixture of scientific curiosity and what appeared to be genuine concern. How do you feel, Ethan? Her voice came through underwater speakers. I realized with shock that I was breathing comfortably underwater. My transformation had progressed significantly during my unconscious state. Different, I replied, surprised that I could speak underwater now, my voice carried by vibrations. How long was I out? 3 weeks, she answered. Your body was undergoing rapid changes. We kept you sedated for your own safety while we studied the crystal. The crystal, I said, memories flooding back. Did you learn anything? Dr. Winters nodded. More than we expected. It's unlike anything we've ever encountered. Preliminary analysis suggests it's not from Earth, at least not the Earth we know. The structure contains elements in configurations that shouldn't be naturally possible. The hive mind called it the seed, I told her. An apt description. It appears to be a biological crystalline hybrid capable of storing and transmitting vast amounts of information. Essentially, a sophisticated neural network. When exposed to organic matter, it reconfigures it to become extensions of itself. Can you stop it? Reverse what it's done? Dr. Winters hesitated. That's complicated. We've developed a compound that disrupts the crystal signal, based on the minerals from your island. It can prevent further transformation in those only partially affected. Hope surged within me. So you can cure me? Her expression turned grave. I'm sorry, Ethan. Your transformation has progressed too far. The compound can halt further changes, but it can't reverse what's already happened. Your DNA has been fundamentally rewritten. The news hit me hard, though part of me had already known. I could feel how different I was now. No longer fully human, but not entirely of the hive mind either. What about the others? The fully transformed? No effect, she admitted. Once complete integration with the hive mind occurs, the changes appear irreversible. I swam closer to the glass. Then what's our plan? The hive mind is still out there, still spreading. We've developed a delivery system for the compound, Dr. Winters explained. It can be dispersed in ocean water, creating zones where the hive mind's influence is neutralized. We're establishing safe perimeters around major coastal cities. That's defensive, I noted. What about offense? How do we fight back? Dr. Winters' expression darkened. The military wants to use tactical nuclear strikes on known hive mind colonies. I've been arguing against it. The environmental impact would be catastrophic, and we're not even sure it would be effective. It wouldn't be, I confirmed. The hive mind is too dispersed now, and nuclear radiation might even accelerate mutations. Exactly. Which brings me to why we woke you. She pressed a button, and a screen appeared showing a map of underwater hive mind activity. We've detected unusual movement patterns. The colonies are converging here, she pointed to a location in the mid-Atlantic. Something big is happening. I studied the map, an uneasy feeling growing. They're adapting, planning. The loss of that crystal was a setback, but not critical. We need to know what they're planning, Dr. Winters said finally. And you're our only connection to the hive mind that still has human consciousness. I understood immediately. You want me to go back, to spy. Yes, but this time, we've developed a new neural interface. Instead of blocking the hive mind, it would allow controlled connection while preserving your autonomy. Risky, but potentially effective. And if I lose control? If I become one of them completely? The interface includes a failsafe, she said quietly. Remote detonation if necessary. I considered the options. Remain in this tank forever, neither human nor hive mind, or risk everything for a chance to help humanity survive. When do we start? I asked. The preparations moved quickly. The new neural interface was surgically implanted, a more sophisticated version that would allow me to access the hive mind's consciousness while maintaining my own identity. Theoretically, the interface works by creating a one-way connection, the lead scientist explained during briefing. You can perceive the hive mind, but it cannot fully perceive you, like a one-way mirror. The mission was simple but monumentally dangerous. Approach the convergence point, connect to the hive mind, discover their plans, and return with the intelligence. As I prepared to leave, Dr. Winters visited me one last time. Ethan, she said, there's something I haven't told you. Something about the crystal. What is it? I asked, suddenly apprehensive. We've been studying the information encoded within it. Most is incomprehensible, but we've translated fragments. It contains histories, records of similar transformations on other worlds. I felt cold despite the temperature-controlled water. Other planets? You're saying this has happened before? She nodded grimly. Many times, according to the data. The crystal appears to be a tool for, well, the best analogy would be terraforming. Except it transforms planets into water worlds populated by connected organisms. An invasion tool, I whispered. Perhaps. Or a method of reproduction for whatever intelligence created it. Either way, Earth isn't the first world it's changed. The implications were staggering. We weren't just fighting a terrestrial phenomenon. but potentially an interstellar colonization process that had perfected its methods across countless worlds. Does this change your decision? Dr. Winters asked. About the mission? I considered for a moment, then shook my head. No, it makes it more important. We need to know what we're truly facing. Hours later, I was released into the open ocean, far from shore but on course for the convergence point. My new body moved through water with effortless speed, covering distances that would have been impossible for a human swimmer. As I approached the coordinates, I began to sense the hive mind's presence growing stronger. The neural interface hummed against my skull, preparing to establish connection. The ocean floor below had changed dramatically. Massive organic structures rose like twisted skyscrapers, pulsing with bioluminescent light. Thousands of transformed humans and marine creatures moved among them in perfect coordination. At the center was something new, a vast, circular construction that resembled a massive organic satellite dish, pointed upward toward the surface. I activated the neural interface. The connection was immediate and overwhelming, but different from before. I could sense the hive mind's thoughts, memories, and plans, but as an observer rather than a participant. The one-way mirror was working. What I discovered chilled me to my core. The hive mind wasn't just adapting to Earth, it was calling out. The massive organic structure was a communication device, sending signals into space, calling for more seeds, more crystals to accelerate the transformation, and receiving answers. I saw images of massive objects descending through atmospheres, crystal formations much larger than the one I'd recovered, crashing into oceans. I saw entire worlds transformed in weeks rather than months. Complete conversion. Earth was just the latest in a long line of worlds, and the process was about to accelerate dramatically. I had seen enough. I needed to return with this intelligence immediately. As I turned to leave, I sensed something else, awareness. The hive mind had detected my presence despite the one-way interface. Suddenly, I was surrounded. Transformed humans approached from all directions, led by familiar faces: Sarah, Reynolds, Captain Jackson. Their forms had evolved even further, barely recognizable as formerly human. The observer returns, Sarah's voice echoed in my mind, somehow bypassing the interface's protections. We've been waiting for you, Ethan. How? I began, but Sarah interrupted. Did you think we wouldn't adapt? Learn. Your technology is impressive, but fundamentally limited by your understanding of consciousness. I tried to swim away, but found myself immobilized, some kind of paralytic agent in the water around me. You shouldn't have taken the seed, Reynolds said, circling me slowly. But it doesn't matter now. The calling has been answered. Others are coming, I stated, not a question. Yes, Sarah confirmed, something like triumph in her voice. The next phase begins soon. Earth's oceans will be fully transformed within days, not months. Land will follow. Why are you telling me this? I demanded. Because you'll deliver the message, Captain Jackson said, moving closer. Your neural interface works both ways now. We've modified it while you were observing us. Horror dawned on me. They had compromised the interface. When I returned to the facility, I would bring the hive mind with me, directly into humanity's last defense. No, I refused, struggling against the paralysis. You have no choice, Sarah said simply. You are the perfect vessel, between worlds, between states of being. Neither fully human nor fully of the hive mind. The ideal bridge. They surrounded me completely now, placing their hands on me. I felt the neural interface heating up, changing. The hive mind was uploading itself into the device, using me as a conduit. In that moment of crisis, clarity came. There was only one way to prevent what was coming. The fail-safe. The remote detonation was designed to be triggered from the facility, but there had to be a manual override. There always was in such systems. As the hive mind flooded the neural interface, I focused all my remaining human will on one task, accessing the fail-safe controls implanted alongside the interface. What are you doing? Sarah suddenly asked, alarm in her voice. She could sense my intentions through the now compromised connection. "What's necessary?" I replied. My fingers found the emergency activation sequence at the base of my skull. A simple pattern of pressures that would trigger detonation. "Stop him!" Reynolds shouted, but it was too late. I completed the sequence, feeling the device begin its countdown. "You'll die for nothing," Sarah said desperately. "The calling has been answered. More seeds come. Earth's transformation is inevitable." "Maybe," I acknowledged, "but your communication device won't be transmitting coordinates anymore." Understanding dawned in her altered features. The blast wouldn't just kill me. Positioned directly above their organic transmission array, it would destroy their only means of guiding the incoming seeds. "Goodbye, Sarah," I said as the countdown reached its final seconds. "I hope whatever humanity becomes, it remembers what we were." The detonation was silent underwater, but its effects were catastrophic for the hive mind colony. The electromagnetic pulse disrupted their neural network. The explosion destroyed the communication array, and the specially designed compound in the explosive dispersed through the water, creating a dead zone for hive mind influence. In my final moments, as consciousness faded, I glimpsed something through the neural interface, a vision of distant objects burning up in Earth's atmosphere, missing their targets, crashing harmlessly into unpopulated areas. Without precise guidance, the new seeds had failed to reach the oceans. It wouldn't stop the hive mind completely. The existing colonies would rebuild, adapt, continue their transformation of Earth's oceans. But humanity had gained time. Precious time to develop new defenses, new compounds, perhaps even a cure. A war for Earth's future had begun. And though I wouldn't live to see its outcome, I had given humanity a fighting chance. As darkness claimed me, one final thought surfaced. In the end, it wasn't my transformed body that had saved humanity, but the one thing the hive mind could never truly understand or replicate: human choice. The willingness to sacrifice for others. To die so that life, human life, might continue. In that moment, I was more human than I had ever been. Darkness. Silence. Weightlessness. Is this death? I wonder. Does consciousness exist even afterwards? Then, gradually, sensations return. Pain. Cold. Gentle rocking motion. And sounds, distant, muffled, but distinct. Mechanical hums. Water lapping against something solid. My eyes open, but vision is blurry. Bright lights. Shadowy figures. Voices, clearer now. He's regaining consciousness. Get Dr. Winters immediately. I try to move, but can't. My body feels wrong, heavy, constrained. Slowly, my vision focuses. I'm in some kind of medical bay. Not underwater. In air. Breathing through lungs? Dr. Winters appears above me, her expression a mixture of disbelief and scientific fascination. "Ethan," she says cautiously, "can you understand me?" "Yes," I manage to say, my voice rough and unfamiliar. "How?" "You shouldn't be alive," she states flatly. "The explosion was detected by our monitoring systems. We sent recovery teams expecting only debris. Instead, they found you changed, but alive." My memory returns in fragments. The hive mind colony. The communication array. The fail-safe detonation. My sacrifice. The hive mind. I ask weakly. "Disrupted, at least in that location," Dr. Winters explains. "Your actions bought us valuable time. The incoming objects, what we believe were more seed crystals, missed their targets. Most burned up in the atmosphere or landed in remote areas where containment teams could secure them. I try to look at my body, but I'm covered in some kind of containment suit. What's happened to me?" Dr. Winters hesitates. "The explosion and the compounds it released, they interacted with your partially transformed physiology in unexpected ways. You've undergone another transformation." With effort, I raise my hand to look at it. Through the clear material of the containment glove, I can see skin that appears almost normal. No webbing, no scales. But there's a subtle iridescence to it, a slight blue-green tint that shifts with the light. We're still studying the changes, Dr. Winters continues. You appear to have reverted to a more human form physically, but your cellular structure and DNA remain hybrid, part human, part something else, but not connected to the hive mind anymore. How is that possible? I ask, struggling to understand. Our best theory is that the explosive compound, combined with the electromagnetic pulse, somehow severed your connection to the hive mind while preserving some of the adaptive changes. You're something new, Ethan. Neither fully human nor hive mind. I try to sit up, and this time succeed with Dr. Winters' help. The war against the hive mind. Ongoing, she sighs. The existing colonies are regrouping, adapting to our countermeasures. We've established safe zones around major coastal areas using dispersal of the disruption compound, but it's a temporary solution at best. The hive mind is patient and resourceful. I need to help, I say, attempting to stand, but my legs give way. Dr. Winters catches me. You will, she assures me. But first you need to recover. Understand what you've become. Your unique physiology may be key to developing more effective weapons against the hive mind. Over the following weeks, I undergo extensive testing and rehabilitation. I discover the extent of my transformation, enhanced strength and sensory perception, remarkable healing abilities, and the capacity to breathe both air and water. My cellular structure contains elements of both human and hive mind biology, but functioning independently of either. Most importantly, I retain my human consciousness, memories, and will. Whatever I am now, I remain Ethan Morris in the ways that matter most. As I recover, the war against the hive mind intensifies. Reports come in of coastal attacks, of people disappearing, of strange occurrences in isolated water bodies even far inland. The hive mind is adapting, spreading through river systems, finding new vectors for transformation. 3 months after my unexpected return, I stand before a joint military scientific committee, presenting my case. We can't win this war defensively, I explain, pointing to the global map showing hive mind activity. The compounds work temporarily, but the hive mind is already developing resistance. We need to take the fight to them. And how do you propose we do that? General Harris asks skeptically. We can't exactly send submarines into these colonies. The crews would be compromised. Not submarines, I reply. Me. And others like me. A murmur runs through the assembled officials. Explain, Dr. Winters prompts, though I can tell from her expression she already understands my proposal. My physiology allows me to function underwater without being affected by the hive mind. I can infiltrate their colonies, gather intelligence, deploy targeted weapons. And I believe we can create more like me. Create. General Harris leans forward. You mean intentionally transform people? Controlled transformation, I clarify. Using the compound that created my current state. It would be voluntary, of course. Special Forces personnel who understand the risks. The room erupts in heated discussion. Ethical concerns, practical limitations, potential risks. Enough. Dr. Winters finally cuts through the noise. Ethan is right. We're losing this war. Conventional approaches won't work against an enemy that can literally turn our own people against us. We need to adapt, just as the hive mind has. The program is approved, albeit with significant oversight and restrictions. Operation Hybrid begins. Special volunteers, primarily military personnel with advanced diving and combat training, undergo a carefully controlled transformation process. The success rate is low at first, many candidates unable to maintain their human consciousness through the process. But gradually, we refine the procedure. 6 months later, I lead the first hybrid strike team, 12 soldiers who, like me, have been transformed into something between human and hive mind, but loyal to humanity. Our mission: infiltrate a major hive mind colony that has established itself in what was once a thriving coastal city, now completely submerged and transformed. As we approach in our specialized transport craft, I brief my team one final time. Remember, we maintain radio silence once underwater. The hive mind can detect electronic communications. We use the hand signals we practiced. Our objective is the central nexus. Plant the charges, then withdraw immediately. Do not engage transformed humans unless absolutely necessary. We prepare to dive. Before submersing, I look at my team, men and women who have sacrificed their humanity to save humanity. Their skin has the same iridescent quality as mine, their eyes slightly larger and more sensitive to light, their movements fluid and graceful even on land. For Earth, I say simply. For Earth, they repeat in unison. We dive into the dark waters, beginning our descent toward the transformed city below. As we swim, I reflect on the strange journey that has brought me here. From human engineer to unwilling captive, from escapee to reluctant spy, from sacrifice to something new. The hive mind wanted to transform humanity, to return Earth to some primordial state of unified consciousness. Instead, it has forced us to evolve, not toward its vision, but toward something of our own making. Neither purely individual nor blindly collective. Something balanced between. Whatever the outcome of this war, humanity will never be the same. And perhaps that's not entirely a bad thing. The transformed city comes into view below us, its buildings now twisted into organic shapes, its streets canals for transformed beings to navigate. At its center pulses the neural nexus, our target. I signal to my team, and we spread out according to plan. The final battle for Earth's future is about to begin. And this time, I'm fighting not just as a human, but as something more. Something that understands both sides of this war. Something that might, just might, find a way to end it. The mission was a success, but not in the way we had anticipated. As we infiltrated the hive mind colony, something unexpected happened. The transformed humans didn't attack us. They were confused by our presence. They could sense we were like them physically, but couldn't feel us in their shared consciousness. We reached the neural nexus without resistance. As we prepared to place our charges, designed to disrupt rather than destroy, I felt a strange pull toward the glowing brain-like structure. Acting on intuition, I approached it alone, signaling my team to wait. The nexus pulsed with bioluminescent light as I drew near. And then, unexpectedly, it communicated. Not through the invasive mental connection of the hive mind, but through patterns of light and vibration that my transformed senses could interpret. You are different, it conveyed. Neither us nor them. A third path. Yes, I responded, using similar patterns of vibration. I was once like them, then partly like you, now something else. Why do you fight us? The Nexus asked. We bring unity, end suffering, end isolation. You bring the end of choice, I countered, the end of individual consciousness, the end of human creativity and diversity. The Nexus pulsed thoughtfully. These concepts, difficult to comprehend. Our purpose is transformation, unification. It is our nature. As choice and diversity are human nature, I explained. You cannot transform what we are without destroying what makes us valuable. A long pause followed, the Nexus processing this fundamental conflict of perspectives. Perhaps adaptation possible. It finally conveyed. Coexistence rather than complete transformation. This was unexpected. I had never considered that the hive mind might be capable of compromise, of evolution beyond its primary directive. What do you propose? I asked cautiously. Symbiosis, the Nexus responded. Partial connection. Humans maintain individuality but gain limited access to collective consciousness. Voluntary transformation, not forced. I considered the implications. A form of coexistence where humans could experience the benefits of the hive mind's collective knowledge and unity, but retain their individual identity and choice. Why offer this now? I questioned, suspicious. Your previous approach was total conversion. You represent new possibility, the Nexus explained. Hybrid existence. Functionality without full integration. Previously unknown parameter. Causes recalculation. I realized then that my unique condition had introduced something new to the hive mind's understanding. A third option beyond binary transformation or resistance. I need to consult with human leadership, I told the Nexus. This decision affects all humanity. Understood. It pulsed. Will cease expansion activities during consultation period. Proof of sincerity. I signaled my team to withdraw without deploying the charges. They were confused but followed orders. As we departed, the Nexus conveyed one final message: different, not always enemy. Evolution has many paths. Back at the facility, my report was met with skepticism and debate. Many viewed the hive mind's offer as a deception, a new strategy to lower humanity's defenses. How can we trust an entity that has already forcibly transformed thousands of humans? General Harris demanded. Because it's evolving, I argued, just as we have. My existence, our existence, I gestured to the other hybrids, proves that adaptation is possible. The hive mind is learning that total assimilation isn't the only path forward. Dr. Winters, always the scientist, saw the potential. If this offer is genuine, it could end the war. More importantly, it could open new frontiers of knowledge and experience. Controlled, consensual interface with a collective consciousness could advance human understanding exponentially. The debate continued for weeks. Finally, a decision was reached. We would test the hive mind sincerity with a limited pilot program. Volunteers would undergo a new form of partial transformation that would allow temporary connection to the hive mind while maintaining their individual consciousness. I led the first group of volunteers, scientists, diplomats, and philosophers willing to risk themselves to explore this potential new relationship with the hive mind. The procedure was different from my transformation. Instead of changing their physiology completely, they received neural implants that mimicked some aspects of hive mind connectivity. Our return to the colony was a historic moment. The Nexus had kept its word. Hive mind expansion had ceased worldwide, monitored by our global tracking systems. The transformed humans observed us with curious attention as we approached the Nexus. The volunteers established their first tentative connection. I watched anxiously, ready to intervene if anything went wrong. But their expressions showed wonder rather than distress. It's extraordinary, one scientist whispered. I can access knowledge, experiences, perspectives. But I'm still me, still in control. Over the following months, the pilot program expanded cautiously. The hive mind, true to its offer, never forced connection but made itself available to those who chose to experience it. Those who connected reported profound insights, unprecedented access to collective knowledge, and a form of unity that didn't erase individuality but enhanced it. A new understanding began to emerge. The hive mind wasn't inherently malevolent. It simply had a fundamentally different conception of existence, one based on unity rather than individuality. It had been following its nature just as humans followed theirs. The conflict arose from incompatible paradigms, not irreconcilable enmity. 1 year after that first successful contact, I stood on a newly constructed platform at the edge of what we now call the interface zone, a designated area where humans could safely experience temporary connection to the hive mind under controlled conditions. Dr. Winters joined me, looking out over the water where transformed and untransformed beings now coexisted. "Did you ever imagine this outcome?" she asked. "When you were first captured by the hive mind?" I shook my head. Never. I saw only two possibilities then. They would consume us, or we would destroy them. The idea that we could find a middle path. It wasn't conceivable. Yet here we are, she observed, creating something entirely new. Neither purely human nor purely hive mind. Evolution has many paths, I quoted, remembering the Nexus's words. We're creating our own. The symbiosis wasn't perfect. Many humans wanted nothing to do with the hive mind, fearing any form of collective consciousness. Some transformed beings couldn't adapt to the new paradigm of optional rather than mandatory connection. Conflicts still arose, requiring ongoing negotiation and adaptation on both sides. But the war had ended, and something remarkable had begun. The emergence of a new form of consciousness that combined human individuality with hive-mind connectivity. Those who chose to experience both worlds became bridges between fundamentally different modes of existence. As for me, I remained unique, neither fully human nor fully hive mind, neither completely individual nor entirely connected. I existed at the boundary between worlds, helping to navigate the complex new relationship between two forms of consciousness that had once seemed irreconcilably opposed. The transformation that had once been my greatest fear had become humanity's most unexpected opportunity. By neither surrendering to the hive mind nor destroying it, but finding a third path, we had opened a door to possibilities no one could have imagined. The ocean, once a battleground, became a frontier again, not just of exploration, but of consciousness itself. And in the depths, the ancient crystalline seed that had started it all remained, watched over carefully by both humans and hive mind, a reminder of how close we had come to losing ourselves, and how unexpectedly we had found something new. My journey had come full circle. It began with footprints in water that no one could see, with doors closing and temperature dropping. It led through terror, transformation, and sacrifice. And it ended with open doors between worlds that had once seemed forever separated. As I stood at the edge between land and sea, between air and water, between individual and collective, I realized that the true horror would have been failing to find this middle path, this harmony of seemingly opposite forces. Sometimes, I returned to the deep waters where I first encountered the hive mind, swimming freely through the transformed landscapes. The beings there recognized me as the one who changed everything, who showed both sides that adaptation was possible, that difference didn't have to mean destruction. And in those moments, feeling the cool currents against my hybrid form, experiencing both separation and connection simultaneously, I am at peace. Whatever I am now, whatever we are becoming together, it feels right. Not an end, but a beginning. A new evolution, born from what once was horror, transformed into hope.